Well, this person wasn't just an influence. This was my best friend. I kind of had two of them, but this one's the one that I didn't even realize was my best friend until he died. He was my cousin. He was 11, 12 years older than me, as near as I can figure. The first I remember of him, which isn't a real good memory, I mean, in other words, I don't know whether I remember it or it's because of the home movie we had. He was old enough to drive, and he drove down to our house from Chambersburg, and we were just little kids, and he took this wooden wagon we had and somehow got a cardboard box on it to make it like a carriage, covered carriage, and he got two pinwheels and mounted on them and get us sitting in it, and then he would run us, pull us around the yard in it, and somehow it got filmed. So it was, that's kind of my first recollection of him. And if I remember right, he was driving some type of woody station wagon. His parents usually had something fairly nice to drive around in. His parents was, well, my uncle, and he was a dentist, and my aunt, she was just a very talented person. So anytime that he was coming around, I looked forward to it as a child. He would come around, and I don't know why, but he was always funny. He could sit there and watch cartoons with us, but he would make up his own statements about the cartoons while we're watching and get us laughing. I say us, my brother, and my sister as well. And he was into cars, and he understood mechanics. He was also a tool and die maker of sorts. I think he was more into repairing machinery than running the machines, but still, he knew how to operate metal turning, metal machining equipment. And like I said, he was into cars. And as I got older, I got into cars. And so then we had something in common. I can remember one day when my parents drove up to their house. He took a 3-deuce setup off of a Corvette and was putting a single carburetor on there to get better gas mileage. I kind of laugh because he probably didn't get much better. I'm not sure. I don't know what the CFMs were, but he was but normally you run on a 2-barrel when you have 3 deuces on. Only when you step on it do you have more. So once he got the carburetor on and it was running, he says, "Well, Kevin," he says, "you're going to give me a ride?" I neglected to tell you this. His right hand was broken. I think he was in a fight and broke a bone in his hand or something like that. Yeah. So I said, "Me?" I think I was only 16. But what the hell? So we're getting ready this is like a 66, 67 Corvette. His brother, Chad, who was a little younger than me, a year or two, no, I guess he was like 4 years younger than me. Anyway, he wasn't that big. And there's only 2 seats in a Corvette. So Gary said he'd come along and he crawled up in the back on the shelf. Gary gets in the passenger side, I get in the driver's side, and I go out there and I'm just putting along because I don't know how to drive this thing. And I haven't had my license that long. I'm a little scared of it. Anyway, after a little while, he says, all right, he says, Kevin, he says, time for us to find out how this thing runs. Now, I come to the conclusion that he didn't want his mother to see him pull away in the car because she didn't like the idea of him driving a stick when his hand was broken. So I'm thinking that's part of the reason he did it. Anyway, on a back road, we pull off and we switch places. He gets out there, gets in the driver's seat, and the first thing he does is he pushes his hand up against the steering wheel, the broken one, and he reaches over with his left hand, gets it in gear, pulls out on the middle of the road, revs the engine up, drops the clutch, and off we're going. I mean, and then he reaches over and he shifts in the second, and the car jumps a little bit and spins because he's got the back end jacked up some, which means the alignment is out on the car. And now we're rolling along. He hits third gear. I don't know whether we go into fourth or not, but we're hauling ass. And about that time, the road drops out from under us. And so here we are. We're airborne. And you wonder where I got the idea to go airborne with the guys in the pickup truck in school. But anyway, so here we are. We're airborne, and because he's using his right hand is broken to steer, he turns the wheel a little bit. And when we land, man, that car just darts off the road. He catches it, gets it back on there, and straightens it out, and he goes, whew. He says, I got to remember, you don't turn the steering wheel when you're up in the air like that. And anyway, after that, he calmed down and just drove it back to the house, and it ran all right. When he would, when I got older, he would come down to my shop every once in a while. Every once in a while, we'd swap engines. In fact, one time he wanted to see if I was willing to buy my 396, and I said I would. And so he told me when he was going to come down and pick it up. Well, I didn't bother taking it out until he was going to get there. So the night before, I filled my car up with gas, and I decided I'm just going to run the piss out of it the whole night. And I was looking forward to having a great time. And this car was running rough as it was. I didn't know what was wrong with it, but I figured it had to be bad. I mean, after my first experience with rebuilding an engine, I figured every engine looked shitty like that one did. And so I just figured this thing had to be bad. Anyway, I go out there and I'm on the highway and I'm running it really hard. We're going to feed some cattle of ours, and all of a sudden, man, it explodes. It's just a backfire through the exhaust, but it sounded like the whole engine exploded, and then it starts missing. Terrible. We get to where we're going and feed the cattle, and I figure, well, we're not going to get to running around the night. This thing ain't going to go nowhere. So I took it back home, parked it, and we started riding around in Steve's car instead. Next day, I pull the engine when he gets there, and I tell him what happened. He doesn't care. He pulls it apart and finds out that really all that happened is that the cam lobe wiped out, and because of that, there was a fuel build up in the system into one cylinder, and that spark plug, when it fired, that mixture, and when that mixture lit, it fouled that plug so bad that it wasn't firing anymore, and so that cylinder was dead. But the fact is the engine was in perfect shape. It didn't even need to be honed. I mean, it got a berry ball honed and new rings, and that's it. Of course, the cam had to be replaced, but all the bearings, everything, the engine was in excellent shape. Excellent. I kicked myself in the ass for selling that one. Another time that we were messing with cars, I had my 62 Impala, and I pretty much just rebuilt this 283 that was a piece of crap. I didn't know it at the time. I still didn't realize how bad it was. It was just a bad engine. That's just all there was to it. Anyway, I used all the original belts and hoses and all that stuff when I put it back together. And when my cousin came down, I took him out for a ride in it, and came back, and I was fairly proud of myself. We got out and opened the hood, and we're standing there looking at it, and just like that, a little stream of water comes out through one of the radiator hoses at us. I can tell you that that was the end of me using old rubber hoses and belts and stuff like that, because I replaced everything on that motor. I ended up the alternator, the starter, the power steering, the belts, the hoses. They all ended up needing to be replaced. Just I had to do one at a time instead of doing it the right way. Another thing with my cousin is he would call up and ask if, this is in the winter, ask if we had any snow. And if we did, I knew when he would ask, he'd say, well, he says, I'm bringing the snowmobiles down. One year he grabs the snowmobiles, they're still in his trailer, and he comes down and he tries to start the one, and it won't start. Now, I mean, these are fast snowmobiles. He didn't have just junk. His stuff was just crazy fast. I mean, all you did was go in a straight line with them. You didn't turn. You could just forget that. They'd pull the front skis off the ground and just get it. They were crazy. Anyway, he couldn't get the thing started, and he finally opened the hood. The whole drive assembly was gone. He forgot. He had taken it off to have the clutch, to readjust the clutches on it as far as to get the variable speed to fly in differently, and because of that, there was nothing on it. He was a guy that every so often he would invite me somewhere or do something, like up at his house. He'd call me up and tell me that I needed a day off. And he would have something planned that he actually needed done. And because everybody loved him, including my wife, she would never argue. And he would say, look, bring some clothes up and just go home in the morning. I'd say, all right. Well, whenever I'd get with him, he would just tell me, he says, this is your time. You can do whatever you want. Now, luckily I didn't. In a lot of respects, what he was possibly suggesting wasn't good, you might say, but I did take it as far as I felt I could. We would pour some concrete, or we'd put the roof on his building, or we'd go up to his hunting lodge, we'll call it, and work on things. In fact, one time we took an AK-47 up there, and semi-automatic, and he took a piece of cardboard and had me stand up against it and traced out a target of a person. and and so we were shooting at me on the tree and things like that. And he would take me to all these dive bars. I mean, these places were in. I'll tell you, the one was an old house in the middle of the woods, no blacktop. There was just, it was a dirt road to it, and all the cars were parked in between the trees all around this house. And you walked up on this front porch and off to the side and opened the door, and there was like a dance floor and all these hillbillies. And when I was sitting there drinking a beer with him, and I danced with a woman, she had most of her teeth, and I mean it, she was missing one. Um, I realized why he liked going there. It made him feel good about himself. And I said it to him, and he says, you're right. He says, you're absolutely right. So he, would give me that break from my family and everything every once in a while. He, and yet he was loved by everybody. Everybody just thought the world of him. I learned something from him in a roundabout way. Is one Sunday he came down to visit, and we were in the habit of going to church in the evenings on Sunday. And I decided that going to church was more important than spending time with my cousin. And I went to church. I felt guilty. Church isn't something that you have to go to. It's something you want to, and yet that's why I went, because I felt like I had to. I'd started going in the evening, so now I have to go every week. Well, screw that. Probably one of the few times I ever called him, and I called him up to apologize and told him it would never happen again. That if he's there, I'm not leaving. He's my friend and all, and he's more than my cousin. I didn't quite understand what I was saying right then, but another time, this one really meant a real lot to me. When I was getting ready to build my house, I knew that it's a steel frame house. It's actually red iron. And I knew that main frame structure was going to take some people to get it up. It's not real heavy, but it's awkward and it's dangerous dealing with it. I asked him if he would help, and he said sure, and he came down the night before, and he stayed at my parents' house, and next morning the weather was shitty. It was raining, and he was there, and I figured out of everybody, he'd be the first one that'd want to leave. I didn't think he would like to be out in that cold, damp weather and all. And out of everybody, he says, well, I came here to work. He says, I got my poncho. He says, my rain suit, whatever. He says, I'm ready to go. I said, you're ready to work in this? He goes, yeah. I said, well, I am too. I says, and my father was the one that kept saying, we don't want to do it and all that stuff. Well, because Gary said so, that changed everything. And so my father-in-law, my brother-in-law, my father, me, Gary, I think that was it. I don't think my brother Steve was there for that. I don't remember. I don't think so. And we got started, and we ended up putting up all the steel that day. So that was a pretty good day. And we would put up a piece of steel, and just as we were getting ready to set it up, it would start raining. And once we got that piece set up and we went back into the container I had to keep stuff in, it would stop. And then we'd go out, we'd get another piece ready, and just as we start pulling it up, it would start raining again. And that's the way it went all day long. But we got it all up, all secured, and ready to go. Now, here comes the end of his life. For whatever reason, he wasn't feeling real good, and they didn't catch his cancer anywhere near in time. Of course, it was liver and pancreas. Now, I want to point out he wasn't a heavy drinker anymore. So, you know, it's a shame. I felt like this wasn't, he didn't deserve this. My father, he wanted him to fight to the very end, and I'm thinking, look, you're going to die. That's just all there is to it. I wanted him to, and me, just him and me, to go out and tear it up one more time. But he told me no. He says, I'm going to fight this. I said, all right. And I tried to say something to him about Christianity, and he says, I don't want any parts of it. You just keep your mouth shut. So I never said anything more about it. Near the end of his life, he needed somebody to preside over his funeral, and so the pastor of our church said he would do it, and so I took him up to meet my cousin. It was a horrible thing to look at because he looked like one of them third world people that's starving to death, or actually better yet, a Jew in the Holocaust that was just skin and bones. It was terrible. Anyway, that was the last I saw of him. And after he died, and my life seemed to be getting a lot shittier, I realized that he was some of my relief. Every once in a while, I had that moment of, pleasure. Every once in a while, I was taken out of my hell, if you will, and given some free time to just not care. Even though I didn't really do anything real crazy. I mean, just drink till I felt good, because he always drove and he was always responsible, so there was never any worries. I can remember he even invited our whole family to Mack Truck for a open house that they had, and that was great because I finally got to see where he works. But you also got to see him, how proud he was of what he had accomplished there. I can remember this one picture that was taken of the whole family and him, and he was in it, but at that point he had a beard. He looked like Abe Lincoln. This is before they found out he had cancer. He was already dying, though. So, anyway, after he was gone, I finally realized, damn, he was my best friend. He's really, really the closest friend I had. I guess that's all there is to say.